Hi, welcome to J100. This is lecture 3 on the normative theories of the press, otherwise known as the four theories. So what are the four theories of the press? These theories are ways of describing the media structure and how they operate within a society. These theories were developed and popularized in 1956, and you'd wonder, so why are we still talking about it? Primarily because it hasn't been replaced. And they are based on observations of three eminent scholars after studying media in 4 centuries, basically from the 1700s to the 20th century. So who are the eminent scholars? You're looking at Fred Siebert, Theodore Peterson, and Wilbur Schramm. So these names will come up throughout your stay in Mass Comm, especially when you are already doing your thesis in J199. So the communication theories are divided, or they basically group them into four main strata, which are popularly known by these four: authoritarian, libertarian, Soviet totalitarian, and social responsibility. So we're going to attempt to discuss briefly each one, including some of the new um, amendments to the theory. But you are still required to do the reading on this topic, which is in your syllabus. So first, the authoritarian theory. So it was developed, or they realized that it was present in the 16th and 17th century England, and unfortunately still widely adopted and still practiced in many places today. The philosophy behind this government is the role of the press is to be a servant of the government and not a servant of the citizenry. So its main purpose is to support and advance the policies of the government in power and to serve the state. So here we have the government in control of media, where even if there is an existence of the private sector or the private media or privately owned media, it does not mean that they are independent of the state. And we had seen this, for example, during the martial law, where your private media was owned by um, cronies of the dictator, and therefore still serve the purpose of the dictator rather than the citizenry. Media ownership. Whoever gets the royal patent or similar permission are usually the cronies of the government leaders. Remember, it was developed in the 16th, 17th century England, where the press was controlled by royalty, by the monarchy. Now that has changed to civil authorities, but the power remains the same. So it's controlled by government through patents, guilds, licensing, and sometimes censorship, or many times censorship. So what are the main prohibitions? Of course, they cannot be, since they serve the state, they cannot be critical of the political machinery, nor can they be critical about the officials in power. Okay. So essential difference from the other types, as we shall describe it, is that media becomes an instrument for affecting government policy, and though not necessarily government owned. So, for example, the Daily Express during the Marcos era was owned by his crony Roberto Benedicto, who also, by the way, took over ABS-CBN after it was sequestered from them by the Marcoses. This type of authoritarian regime for the press is still seen today, for example, in Singapore, where the Straits Times and Media Corp, the two big, well, the Straits Times is the biggest newspaper in circulation, and Media Corp is basically their only broadcast network, are both operated by cronies of the party, the official party of the government. Now, on the opposite pole or opposite end extreme is the Libertarian Theory, which was developed also in England after 1688, and of course was practiced mainly in the US from the writings of Milton, Locke, Mill, and other general philosophy or rationalism and natural rights. So, taking off from the American Constitution, which protected the freedom of the press, the philosophy here is that the press should be a separate institution that belongs to the people and serves their best interests. Of course, we know that um, this has its caveats, this has its faults as well. But one thing we can say is that government has no say in how the media is run. So its main purpose is to inform, entertain, and sell, but chiefly to help discover truth and to check on government. So when this was developed in the 1700s, especially in the United States, it acquired what we call the watchdog function of media, where you had journalists who felt the responsibility of providing information about what government was doing so that the citizens could see if their government was acting the way it should. Now, who could start up media under this regime? Of course, the private sector. No? And of course, the private sector, meaning the rich and the powerful who have the means to put up the media institutions because it costs very much, let's say, to run a broadcast network or to put up a newspaper, it needs a lot of capital. Um, it's not controlled by government, but rather by a self-right process of truth in the free marketplace of ideas and by the courts. What do you mean by free marketplace of ideas? Meaning it's the market, so demand and supply. So competing media establishments have to compete for the limited market. They have to attract the attention of the readers in order to survive. And they have to attract advertisers, which will be the main funders of their media institution. We add courts because, of course, this is where if they overstep their powers, no, or they act irresponsibly, then the aggrieved party can go to the court to sue them for libel or to sue them for defamation, depending on the fault of the media. Uh, so the only prohibitions that are or its limitations would be defamation. Of course, that's why you can bring a media to court if they defame you. Obscenity, indecency, and wartime sedition. So a call to war or a call for revolution is something that when we discuss freedom of the press, we will talk about this some more. So the essential difference of the libertarian theory from the other four would be that the instrument for checking on government and meeting other needs of society would be the people. So basically, an active citizenry is the only control of a libertarian or a liberated press. So if the citizenry remains passive, then they are controlled by the market, and it will now be the advertisers who are actually in control. As we said, there are strengths and weaknesses to this theory. Um, the, the strengths are it values media freedom. It values the individual, so each citizen has the same rights. And it precludes or prevents the government from interfering or controlling media. Now, the problem with this theory, or the problem which occurred, especially in the late 1800s and the 1900s in the US, and actually you might say up to today, is that the theory is overly optimistic about media's willingness to meet responsibilities. As we know, there are many ethical issues in media, and this is primarily because they are not fulfilling some of their responsibilities. So it's overly optimistic also in individual ethics and rationality. So again, we find issues such as bribery in the media, fake news, um, and many others. So it also ignores the need for reasonable control of media. What does that mean? It simply means in terms of of citizen control, of respecting citizens' rights, because it could also violate human rights through their lack of privacy, for example, invading the privacy of private individuals, and not just celebrities or government officials. And then it poses problems about conflicting freedoms, the rights of the individuals versus the rights of the press, or the rights to know. So you have issues like voyeurism, um, and indecency, etc. Okay, now to balance both the extreme of authoritarianism and social and libertarian theory is the social responsibility theory, which was developed later on and adopted by the three scholars from the writings of W.E. Hawking. So this was adopted after the US Congress called for a commission on the freedom of the press in 1947. The commission was called because of a lot of violations of personal privacies, and a lot of people were being hurt by media and defamed. Many times also voyeurism, or muckraking took precedence over responsible reporting. And so the US government felt the need to investigate or to look into the issue. And from then on, they developed certain, not policies, or not something that they imposed, but rather guidelines to help media to become more responsible. So the philosophy behind this is that the moral right of a free public expression is not unconditional, since the claim of the right is based on the duty of a man to the common good. The ground of the claim disappears when this duty is ignored or rejected. So the main purpose for this theory is to provide a forum of ideas, to give the public also a right to say. For example, the section on letters to the editor, feedback, grew from this theory, because before they just ran it the way they wanted without listening even to their audience. Of course, media here remains privately owned, but now there is the creation of public service broadcasting. What is this? Unfortunately for us, we only know PTV4 should fall under this, but as we know, unfortunately, PTV4 serves as a government mouthpiece. However, a true public service broadcasting would serve the public independent both of government and the private sector. So they are funded by taxpayers, and they can run and operate without worrying about its commercial value, and therefore they can focus on public service programs. One good example here is the BBC. We see that if you watch the BBC, you find that they can be critical of their own government, and yet they are run by taxpayers. They are run rather by taxpayers' funds. They are technically a government corporation, but they are there to serve the public. And apart from news, they have very nice documentaries. They also have very nice, even artistic and cultural programs. For example, they've put up the entire Shakespeare plays on their network. They've put up British theater on their network. And then they have very good and incisive documentaries on their network. So these are all at the service of the public. In the United States, there's what you call the National Public Radio, NPR, which also serves in the same way. It's independent of both government and the private sector. And you find very good material in there, both on their website and of course on their podcasts. So the media is free but self-regulated. So also here, one of the focus of the theory is that the industry should come up with a code of ethics that should guide them. So the code of ethics is not imposed by the government, but an agreement among the participants, the players, basically all the media, on how they should behave ethically and basically to police themselves, which is what self-regulation is, so that they help each other be responsible and knowing the potential of media to use it well. So the prohibitions here are, of course, what falls under the law, such as defamation, obscenity, indecency, wartime sedition. But basically, before one goes to court, there is intervention by the industry associations. In the Philippines, we have for the print publications, you have the Philippine Press Institute. And for broadcast, you have the Kapisanan ng mga broadcaster ng Pilipinas. How is it different from the other types? So media here must assume obligation of social responsibility. If they do not, someone must see that they do, which is why, for example, the KBP has rules that can penalize its members, and they actually charge fines for members who violate their code of ethics. Okay. So again, despite being such an ideal setup, we have this theory also has its strengths and weaknesses. For strengths, of course, it values media responsibility. It values audience responsibility. It limits intrusion in media operation by the government. It allows reasonable government control of media only in terms of giving guidelines. Values diversity and pluralism, meaning that, for example, in the United States, the private part of self-regulation is to make sure that all the minorities are represented, that even in the newsroom there are the presence of women and blacks. And then it aids the powerless. So there's this notion that they have to be the voice of the voiceless. And it appeals to the best instincts of the media practitioners and their audience. Of course, the weakness here is that, again, it is overly optimistic about media's willingness to meet responsibility. It is overly optimistic about individual responsibility, as we've seen, individually irresponsible media practitioners. It underestimates the power of profit, motivation, and competition. So as we see, many of the ethical issues is still same as with the libertarian mode, a theory of demand and supply. So if the demand or whatever sells more, even if it's not, even if it puts ratings over information or public affairs, then ratings win. And it legitimizes the status quo. What does that mean? It it doesn't look for change. It facilitates the sometimes the capitalist attitude of the media. Now, the last of the four is a Soviet totalitarian theory, which is basically the model of the after the 1917 revolution in the Soviet Union, and restructured based on the Marxist-Leninist principles, as well as the Nazis of Germany and Mussolini's um, dictatorship in Italy. So the philosophy here is that government media provide positive thoughts to create a strong socialized society, as well as providing information, education, entertainment, motivation, and mobilization. So does it sound good? Read between the lines. What does it mean? Positive thoughts means that they cannot tell you what is really going on. They will tell you only the good stuff. So that for you, you are living in the utopia where everything is going right, which means that human rights are not reported. Um, the death toll, for example, from a virus like now, we can see that in Russia we cannot really trust the statistics that they put out regarding the um, COVID incidents, because they keep it um, under surveillance, based on some news that had filtered out of of Russia in the early part of COVID. We know that some doctors who were the whistleblowers suddenly decided to commit suicide. So what does that mean? So the idea here is that it provides the information that the government wants you to know. So the main purpose of the media should be to act as a tool for government propaganda, meaning everything is well and all right. Government controls totally the media, so with the idea of serving the working class and their interests, meaning that there is no private sector media. Everything, both the print and broadcast, and if possible, even online, is operated by the government or by the state. And then, of course, even that which is controlled is surveyed. So there's surveillance, and there is economic and political action of the government if the media goes against the control of the state or what the state wants to make known. So the prohibitions here are criticism of the party objectives as tactic. Sometimes, and what we realize, if there is a falling out, for example, within the party, it's possible that media is also used to attack certain government officials with the idea that they're being transparent, when actually that person could have lost favor from the ruling party, as we see in the media in China. So the state is the state owns and closely controls media, which exists solely rather as arms of the state. So critique the Soviet media theory allows some restriction based on the national or the nation's interests. Journalists or the press are meant to support the leadership rather than act as watchdogs. And if the leadership is wrong, the whole nation will suffer a lot. Because based on this theory, the government is always right. Now, after the four theories, other um, communication scholars contributed to the four theories to try to expand their boxes, you might say, the boxes that categorize the media institutions. And a varied number of scholars had proposed some other theories. One of these popular proposals to add to the four theories is called the development theory. So the development theory seeks to explain the normative behavior of the press in countries that are conventionally classified together as developing countries. It is not easy to locate or in any particular institution or country because it encompasses a great variety of fluctuating economic and political conditions. So media here, the idea here is to support existing government and its efforts to bring about socio-economic development. Actually, this is the basis for what we now have. We have a whole field called development communication. So the idea of development communication is that you're serving to boost or to advocate certain policies of government. So for example, if the policy of government is to push agrarian reform, then the development communication strategy would be to push those policies, to write news about it, to popularize the idea in the minds of the public. Its main purpose is to accept and carry out positive development tasks in line with nationally established policy and give priority to national culture and identity. So sometimes it does affect, or they try to affect culture, and this is part of the development communication. So not just in the news, but a more total package from even advertising, film, broadcast, talk shows, a radio drama are focused on sending a particular message. Media ownership can be both public and private. There are some shows, for example, on PTV4, that can be characterized as under this theory or development communication. For example, some of its educational programs fall under this. Media should give priority news and information to links with other developing countries, which are close geographically, culturally, or politically. So here we have a push towards, for example, or every time, for example, there is a publication or a promotions of the ASEAN, you might say that this is part of development theory. Like you have a good policy and you want to make it more popular or to proliferate the news about it. So its major tenets is journalists and other media workers have responsibilities as well as a freedom in their information gathering and dissemination tasks. So government doesn't actually dictate what you have to say or what you have to report, but it does try to influence based on the policies. Like, this is our priority. Can you please write about this? And in the interest of development, the state has a right to intervene, restrict media operations, and devise censorships or actually also push subsidies and direct control can be justified under this theory. So basically, it's neither here nor there. It's neither controlling per se, nor is it liberal per se. So it's basically, if the media is promoting government policies, then we leave it by itself. If they're not, then we intervene. So basically, that's what it's saying. Another type of theory is the democratic participant theory. This theory is actually one of the later ones, and came in maybe after 2000, by democratic thinkers and political political science scholars who felt that its predecessors, libertarian and social responsible theories, was falling short of reality, and I guess a result of their own disillusionment. So the idea of this theory, or its founding philosophy, is a reaction against commercialization and monopolization of privately owned media, and against the centralism and bureaucratization of public broadcasting institutions. So they want more diversified media to serve a greater public. They want the minority to have their own media so that they can be heard. One of the results, for example, of this type of from this theory came the birth of the Al Jazeera network. So you might say that, well, basically, if you have networks like CNN and BBC, which are so Western oriented, and sometimes they can be biased against news of the Arabic world. So Al Jazeera was put up precisely to counter that, to have the voice of the Middle East also heard, to have the voice of a more Islamic um, point of view heard in news and information. So it runs as professionally as CNN and BBC, but from a different perspective. So the main purpose of this theory is to create a greater pluralism instead of a centric view or a Western view. And it encourages localism. So it encourages the local press or the local point of view. For example, another network that is growing is the, well, of course, we can have our opinion about this, the Chinese news network, so that the point of view of China is also heard. And encourages the rise of community and alternative media. So these are media that are smaller media, they're not conglomerates, but they also provide a diverse view. So media ownership is based that conglomerates are replaced or juxtaposed, or side, that you have side by side with the big media is the small media or the small scale media enterprises, which is only possible because of the internet. So you can see why this theory came the after the year 2000. So with the development of digital media, which has brought down the cost of running a media institution, it is now possible. So media producers and media users are given an equal footing. In fact, you might say that the rise of the citizen journalists can also be under this theory. All right, so additional readings, and you'll find it in your syllabus, as well as the links on the website, is John Neron's Four Theories of the Press. There is also another reading which is not required but would be a good additional reference, the Beyond the Four Theories of the Press. And of course, homework is to write a 500 to 700 word reflection essay on the four theories. You can include the newer ones if you wish. And which one do you think applies to the present day situation in the Philippines? Explain your answer. So you may submit this via UVLE. I hope by now you have your UP emails. Okay, so this concludes lecture 3 on the four theories of the press. The deadline for the assignment is in your syllabus.